And we are back for our optional session. And as we talked about earlier, this is all about our ISD schools and programs. And we are going to just talk a little bit real quickly, just kind of about the current state of ISDs and their use of MICIP for their schools and programs, just to kind of set the stage a little bit. And then we have a guest here today from Van Buren ISD is going to do a little bit of sharing. Welcome, Jennifer. And Frank, you got her all promoted to co-host status. Excellent. I'm going to share a little bit about what we're doing here in Muskegon ISD. And then we really want to kind of transition into an open forum to talk a little bit more about this and give others a chance to share where they are now. We might do that full group. If it looks like there's a lot of people that'd like to share, then we might also do breakouts. So we'll just kind of play that one by ear when we get to that spot. But to talk just a little bit about the current state, when I had originally talked to Terry about this, there's really many ways that ISDs that run schools and programs can approach this. And so there's not one specific way that is either being promoted or required or anything like that. And we could run this as each school is its own individual and they're going to each complete a goal. You can treat the ISD as a district, and you can make overarching goals for all of your ISD school programs. There's no limitation to how we put this into place. And I think that this is a time for us to really just have some conversation around that, not to arrive at one specific model, but just to understand what's being done around the state and think about how that will be the best for our programs, because all of our programs are different. We have different kinds of schools. We have different amounts of schools. We serve different populations of students. So it is set up to be flexible about how we do that. So that's kind of the current state. And I wanted to jump right in and give Jennifer a chance to talk about Van Buren ISD. And I don't know, did you need screen sharing, or were you just kind of going to have more of open conversation, Jennifer?
I think just open conversation will be fine.
Sure.
Thank you. Well, I'm actually really glad to hear you say that about the current state, because we kind of toggled back and forth about how we were going to work with our ISD as a whole on the plan. And so in the end, we decided to do it as a whole district instead of breaking it down into small groups. And so that way we could kind of work through some of the obstacles that maybe our locals are seeing as well. But as you all know, with working with that many programs, it looks different. So the programs we serve, basically we do special education, everything from the Learning Center to Behavior Center, Community Transition Center, early childhood, all of that. We also do other early childhood with preschool. We do migrant ESL and Van Buren Tech Center. So we have obviously several programs, and kind of brought all of our people together for an initial meeting several months ago, and kind of started from there. So that initial meeting was kind of more talking about the purpose of MICIP, really kind of filling people in, again, like in a local, people were kind of all over their place with what they even knew about what is continuous improvement, how is this different than we've done in the past. So that meeting was just kind of like an overview, probably for the first couple of meetings. Then after that, we really went into, okay, bring in some data, but at that point, we still weren't for sure of our focus. So right or wrong, we came to that initial meeting with lots of data, and then had to kind of start weeding through that. And so what we found was we had a couple of people who had already looked at data a lot and kind of knew how processes for that. And so the next time we met, we split people up differently. And so they weren't with their same programs, it was various programs. And from there, we kind of just used a few protocols to look at data and to kind of talk through it and identify our trends. So once we did that over a couple of meetings, we came up with a few trends, probably 5 or 6 like big global trends that we were seeing across the whole ISD. And then we had a lot of conversation about narrowing that down even further to one. And so that's kind of at the point where we're at right now. And ironically enough, I'm jumping off of this meeting to go there next to do the next step, which is kind of, we're hoping to get to pieces of the fishbone today. So actually today's timing worked out really well to have these conversations and then to kind of flow into that with our district next. So we're going to kind of talk about really at our next meeting or this next meeting in a few minutes that desired state and where we're at now currently and maybe some steps to get there, and then talk about the fishbone as well. So I feel like we have just been working through it, and I've been able to take some of the pieces that we've done with our with the ISD back to our locals and work through that with them as well. And again, everyone is at a different point in the process, and so just kind of I'm excited to hear also what other people are doing at the ISD level to see how what we're doing fits with that or how we can improve our process as well.
So wanted to just kind of open up for any questions that anybody might have for Jennifer, just about their process, maybe how they brought people together for that, where they found time to do those sorts of things. Just any questions that anybody might have for Jennifer. I have a couple, but I'll wait to see what other people might have.
So just to hit on a couple things you just said, most of our people were directors of the different programs, along with HR. Our superintendent has been involved in the process. People from all of our programs, I think, are represented there. One thing we are lacking is a couple community members that are outside of our program. So we have some obviously community members who work there as well, but no one who's completely outside. And the timing, we were doing it after school, but we found like people were just like frazzled at the end of the day. And so we've actually moved that to like our meeting starts at 11 to mid-morning because they all work at the ISD, right? And so they can kind of fit that into their schedules versus a local, right? Where sometimes that's a lot harder to bring those teams together during the day.
So a question in chat was around what types of data did you start with, and did each program bring their own data?
Yes, so we started with each program bringing their own data, and that's kind of where we had just like everybody brought a lot of data, and then that's where we just started saying, even from that point, okay, what are we kind of seeing like in your small group? What are some things that kind of poke out at each of your data? And then next time, let's hone in on that a little bit more. So we brought everything from attendance to HR. We were looking at like retention of staff. We brought behavior data. We brought, we did not look at so much achievement data at this particular meeting, because then our focus started to kind of drive into culture of the overall ISD. And so that's kind of where we're going. So we looked more at, like I said, the retention and some of the other pieces of data that would help support that. And we're still actually in the process of making sure we have enough. And that's actually one thing that came up in our conversations this morning was sometimes that fishbone activity leads you down a path where you realize I need more data to help support this. And so then it's that ongoing of, okay, now I'm going to look at that data again and come back together again.
Jennifer, may I ask you a couple questions, and maybe I missed this?
Sure.
What is your role again?
I'm an instructional consultant. So I work mostly with our locals on MTSS and the continuous improvement process.
So who leads like the continuous school improvement plan at Van Buren? Is it led by your director of special ed or assistant superintendent? What does that look like?
Director of instructional services.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So her and I are kind of co-leading those meetings.
Okay. So I just know, like, I'm from Ionia ISD, and so our model looks a little different. And so as I'm listening to you, I think about how when I've done the school improvement plan, it really represents the programs within the center-based building.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really, our plan has represented in the past SEI, SCI, and Tier 3 ASD. And so when I've developed a plan, it's been built around those three programs.
Right.
So as I was listening, I'm like, our plan has never encompassed like different programs out in locals. I guess maybe we think maybe they're going to be on that local district plan. Like I have lots of questions when I have supervision, but.
So ours doesn't include the locals. It's just the programs within our ISD, but we're also helping to support our local programs. through
So
the
we have ISD programs housed in local school buildings. So like, are you following me? So we have
Yes.
ASD classrooms out there,
Yes.
MOSI. We haven't included transition, if I'm honest, and our brains have gone to transition being beyond that pre-K to K, where continuous usually is housed. Not saying that we can't bring that back into our arena, but in the past we haven't. And so that's why I was curious, like when I think about the data sources I use attendance, my parent surveys, seclusion and restraint data, suspensions, our progress on IEP benchmarks.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my driving forces.
Yes. And we've looked at that data as well. And to be honest, this is the first time we've come together as a whole ISD. We have typically done, our career has done one, our behavior center has done one, our Burke-Owen Center has done, so they've done their separate ones. So this is the first time. And that's why I think everyone really wasn't sure what kind of data.
I'm feeling better.
Nope. And so I think that even as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself that we are going to continue to come up with other data that we will continue to collect throughout next year to help support us in our goals. So even I think sometimes going through this process shows the gaps in your data, right? Like we don't have data that shows us this. So now we need to figure out how are we going to collect that and make sure that we're measuring that in some way.
So yeah, I have my teachers turn in a document that shows all of their IEP benchmarks for each classroom. And then this year we're doing marking periods 1, 2, and 3, because obviously we haven't started state testing. So we know we're going to be like power testing from here into the finish line.
Right.
Unfortunately. So, and then what they do is our goal is 80% of our students will show growth or improvement on IEP benchmarks. So then when a student shows that improvement, they put the data in green. If they don't show improvement, then they put it in red. So it's like a quick visual, because I'm combing through all the classrooms in my building.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a quick way for me to get an idea, where are we at? And then the question is, is it that the student wasn't making progress, or is it that the bar was set too high? And then we can, go in and do another dig and try to figure out the why to students not making progress. Was there an attendance issue? Did we file truancy? Like all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So Jennifer, I know that you had your meeting is actually starting at 11. So she gets to jump straight from PD on this stuff to presenting about it to running the meeting. So talk about job embedded. Is there anything, any last minute things that you'd like to convey, or anything that anybody might want to ask of Jennifer before she has to head out?
I see in the chat some systems level data as well at the ISD, and those are also conversations that we have been having too. I know I was trying to fit everything in a quick short time here, but yes, I agree with that. Those are things that we are looking at, especially when we're looking at the whole ISD as a whole. What are systems that we need to, and we found some gaps already, like this building is not doing this or collecting data the same way or whatever. So we are looking at those things as well.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Good luck with your next meeting.
Thank you so much.
All right. I am going to just talk a little bit about our program at the Muskegon ISD. There's some similarities and also some differences to the way they're running that. Before I get into that, I did want to point out that Ben shared in the chat a link to the continuous improvement communication that has a good section in there about what's required for ISDs. So I'm thinking about like Angela's question about, what about these programs that are in schools and things like that. And it actually, I think, answers maybe that question. So I'd recommend everybody going and checking that out.
And I did link that under the optional session resources.
And it's also in the repository. So we've got it.
These guys are all over it. Okay, so about the Muskegon ISD, so we have a career tech center. We also have 3 categorical programs. We have a categorical SXI program, that's our Wesley School. We have a categorical EI program, which is our Lakeshore Learning Center. And then we have a transition campus, which is our 18 to 26. We also have a juvenile transition center, which is an adjudicated youth facility. I put an asterisk on that one because a lot of, I think many ISDs might, be putting something into place, but they don't actually have to complete the consolidated application for their schools because those schools may not get Title I, Title II, and those sorts of things. But my Juvenile Transition Center gets Title I-D. And so I actually have to complete the consolidated application for our Juvenile Transition Center so we can get those Title I-D funds. So I just put an asterisk on that. That's the only one that that is going to have that the thing that the locals have where, our continuous improvement plans and our funding is going to overlap. We do also run a very large preschool program. It's somewhat decentralized to the locals and does not have its own building code and all those sorts of things. So I did not include them this year in our processes. And our Career Tech Center is running its own improvement process through the Office of Career Tech. And they are not also going to be participating this year. So basically these 4 schools, Wesley, Lakeshore, Craig, and the Juvenile Transition Center are the ones that are participating in our process this year. And if you look at the resource that Ben shared, it says anybody that has a school code needs to have a school improvement plan, and MICIP can satisfy that. And so our Career Tech Center has a different process that they have to run through the Office of Career Tech. And so they are being satisfied of having a school improvement plan that way, not necessarily through being involved with MICIP this year. That doesn't mean in the future that they might not get involved in it and those sorts of things, but for this year, that's what our focus is. Also, Craig campus does not have its own school code. It's actually under the school code of Wesley School. But they're actually in a different location. And so it also says in the resource that Ben shared that it's okay to have people that don't have school codes in your MICIP plan too. And so I have both of those situations. So I just wanted to kind of share that in case there's something similar going on with anything that anybody else is working on. So basically our other schools, so those 4 schools that I mentioned, we got together with them and with our director of special education and our director of instructional services, in fact, with our both of our associate superintendents as well, and kind of talk through the process, much like what Jennifer was saying. We just talked through the process. These are the changes that we're making. A lot of the stuff that we talked about in our PD here the last couple times that we've met. And after talking through all of that, they were really intrigued in making in having one area of inquiry and possibly getting to one goal for all 4 of their programs. And so we started with the area of inquiry that's in bold there, which is using student data for targeted technical assistance, IEP, team decisions, and transition. So some of the things that Angela had mentioned earlier, actually. And so that's the area of inquiry we started with. So if you recall just the process in general, you start with an area of inquiry, you do your data discovery, you move on to root cause. And so this was our area of inquiry that we agreed on. So then we got together with teams, representative teams from each of the programs, and the teams were made up of the principal and at least 1, but usually 2 other members of their school teams. And we got together and worked through the data discovery process. And so I wanted to share what that looks like. So here on under our optional session resources, it says MAISD example, and then I'll talk about that planning template here in a minute. So basically what I did with them is we got together and I basically kind of made a Google Doc template of MICIP that's a little bit different than other ones because of the different way that we're putting this together. And so I put our area of inquiry at the top, and then we started with the discover whole child data. What data objects did you analyze, including academic, non-academic, and systems? So this was the same questions that are being asked in MICIP. I made a spot for ISD-wide data, but the buildings really were kind of talking about their own data at that time. So the way this is set up is I just kind of split it up to say, was there any ISD-wide data that we wanted to consider? and then what was the data that we were going to consider at each of the buildings. So I won't talk through each one of these things, but hopefully that will answer the questions about what kind of data that were we looking at. And we went in and we completed an initial data analysis summary and the initiative inventory. And this was about as far as we got at our first meeting. And we're between our first and second meetings right now. So I don't have a nice tied up with a bow finished product to show you in MICIP. We're kind of at a really actually a pretty similar spot that Jennifer's team was at. We've some of the buildings completed and wrote a gap statement, and one of our schools actually was able to start thinking about root cause. So at our next meeting, which is going to be very similar to the one that Jennifer just left to go and join for hers, we're going to pick up at root cause, and we're working on the protocols to kind of take all of these, because our programs are very different. They all serve a very different population. So how are we going to come together in this area to look at root cause and start to think about writing goals around that area of IEP development, targeted technical assistance, and transition. So those are three things that are common among all our programs. So how are we going to pull out, what are we writing for our data summaries, and how are we going to pull out and work on root cause? We're working through the protocols for that for our next meeting. So I think that kind of summarizes where we were with it so far. We'll finish up. It has a spot in here to put in our challenge statements, and for us to start thinking about what our goals and strategies will be, our end targets and interim targets. So the whole process up until strategies is all in this one document. And if that document might be helpful for your team, there's a blank template of that right below that in the dashboard. So that is kind of where we are with Muskegon ISD. So just would like to see, did I ask if Dave, it was asked if you could share the documents read. Oh, did I not set the sharing correctly? Sorry. Let me do that right now, and then I won't forget.
And it's also under the what's the name of it? Okay, the dashboard document. It's on the second or third page under optional session resources.
Yep. So it is set up for read only right now. So what that means is you need to make a copy to your own drive. So if it's read only, then you just have to go up to file and then make a copy, and that'll put a copy on your drive. You can also download it as a Word document, but yeah, it's view only so that it stays a template that everybody can use. Did anything else pop up in chat that I can address right now before I open it up for any specific conversation?
The only one was the ISD data sets, and I linked those in the into the dashboard as well.
Yeah, it goes through the guide is there that Ben mentioned, and then Terry had the, there's actual templates on there as well. So lots of tools to explore on that MDE site. So, definitely look at that one.
Any specific questions about what's going on at Muskegon ISD before we move into an open forum time for the last 20 minutes or so?
Dave, I'm wondering the same thing as it looks like Lynn was wondering about choosing your area of inquiry. I see a lot of data in your matrix. And so how did you narrow and focus, or really have you not? I mean, what would you say to that, I guess?
I think that we have a lot of narrowing to do. So if you think about that area of inquiry, it's almost like 3 areas of inquiry. And I think when we get to our root cause analysis, we're going to have to decide on, do we really want to kind of have 3 areas that we're looking at, or do we want to zero in on IEP development? Do we want to zero in on transition? Or, do we want to zero in on our targeted technical assistance, which is basically the monitoring that we're doing with with all the programs, since they're all special education programs. So I think at that point, we're going to have to narrow it down a little bit more at our next meeting.
So who came up with that original statement with the IEP pieces, the transition pieces? Because like, where did that come from?
So we that came up at an initial meeting that we had with all of the principals or directors of the programs, and our special ed director, our instructional services director, and our associate superintendents. So we kind of all got together. We dug through, what is MICIP, how do we move through the process, and kind of identifying the first step as we need to identify an area of inquiry so that we can decide what data to bring. And that was where that ended up. That came from that meeting.
So that was a decision that came from a discussion amongst those people then,
Right.
Based on a MICIP overview. Okay.
Right. And much like other parts of MICIP, as you work through it, you get to a certain point and you're like, you know what? I think we need to go back and rethink that a little bit because at first you're like, oh, wow, that sounds great. That's something that we all apply to. And then you get down and you look at the amount of data and the differences of the programs, and you're like, and you go back and look at the statement again, and you're like, we made 3 areas of inquiry and we just put them into one statement. So that'll be something to tackle at our next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right. If anybody thinks of anything else as we go along, feel free to just throw it in the chat or send me a private message. I'll try to keep my eye on that. I'm going to go back and share my screen again. And I have just wanted to see what everybody thought about this. This is the open forum pieces that I was hoping that everybody might want to share about. And I am open to, if there are maybe 1 or 2 other ISDs that feel like they've engaged in the process enough to be able to share at this point. I'd be more than welcome to do what we just did with Van Buren and Muskegon ISD and hear from a couple other ISDs. Or we could go ahead and just get into random breakout rooms and engage in just some conversation with some of our colleagues around these questions. So those are 2 different ways that we can approach this. I was going to see if maybe we would vote on that. And so we're going to just do a chat vote for that. So number 1 would be if we'd like to just maybe hear from 1 or 2 other ISDs. And number 2 would be if we could just go ahead and go into breakout rooms and then just have some collaborative time in our breakout rooms. So if we can go ahead and vote in the chat. And of course, number 1 is predicated on that there are more ISDs that want to share. So I'm seeing lots of 1s. Okay, so I'm hoping I'm seeing an avalanche of 1s. So now what I'm hoping is that some of those people that said 1 might be willing to share. Otherwise, we're going to do the breakout anyway. So Frank and I did reach out to a bunch of ISDs to see if they could share and those sorts of things. And the only taker that we were able to get at that time was Van Buren. So I was hoping to have a couple of others. So is there anybody that is willing to share? You saw that both from that I shared and also from Jennifer's and Van Buren, we're not done with the process. We don't think we have a perfect process. It's just sharing. And so is there anybody that would be willing to unmute and maybe just kind of talk through some of those items that are on the that I shared?
Well, I can start from the Ottawa ISD. I'll be very transparent as I'm not part of the overall process of the continuous improvement cycle at the ISD. But where they're currently at, I asked for some feedback from the assistant superintendents is basically they're assembling their data stories. And there's a meeting, it's either this week or early next week, where they're going to bring their data stories for just a general discussion. And then they're going to kind of leapfrog, if I understand it correctly, to write a goal. and then next year go more in depth and follow the process. Now, a lot of that is subject to change because they may get into their data stories and they may start to go down the true process as it's intended, or they may just, like I said, leapfrog and build a goal. So right now, I would say that some are further ahead than where we are in regards to that. And so we're still trying to take that grace approaches. I think we'll be okay wherever we're at.
So Mike, can you maybe talk a little bit more about what you know about how they who's on the teams, how do they make the teams, those sorts of things?
You bet. And I heard similar. So we have very similar programming as what Muskegon had with the Juvenile Justice Institute. We have the detention center. We have the OAC, the Ottawa Area Center, which were severely handicapped kiddos. And so those individual building leaders are bringing their data stories to one large contextual meeting. If they're going to do that versus share out electronically, if they're going to share that with poster paper, I don't know what they're going to do for the sharing, and then just kind of look at some overall themes. And then I think the main goal here is they want to write an entire ISD goal versus individual building goals of the programs in which we have our hand in.
I'd say the same thing for Muskegon. We want to try to get to the point where we can make one overarching goal that's going to make sense for everybody. And we'll see if that works. Any questions for Mike? All right, anybody, any other ISDs willing to share where they are with things? There's a couple of prompts that you can use just right up on the screen.
I'd like to pose a question to the group, I guess, because
Sure.
our ISD, anyways, will this work be presented to our chief academic officers or assistant superintendents? How is this being conveyed outside? So I'm a member at CIFN. How much of this is being talked about at GELN or other forums? Because I'm not sure how much initiative, how much leverage I can get on moving this in until it becomes something that's more beyond my CIFN realm, I guess.
So are you talking about how to get the ISDs to know that this is what they're supposed to do and to get started on it?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Absolutely. I mean, I've had the conversation or sent the communication and so forth. And, coming from the continuous improvement team lens, getting my superintendent and that cabinet to find the value that we would, have in the MICIP process. There's some disconnect still. It's just not, we don't have that leverage, I guess, to get that ball moving. And without GELN or that organization that they sit in, seeing it and emphasizing it, I'm not sure what happens out of that. Does that make sense?
It does to me. I don't know, Terry or Ben, do you have any thoughts on that one before we open it up for the group?
So the last time I presented at GLN, which was a couple months ago, I did present basically the information that's in the CC. Beyond that, we haven't been asked to, share it at MASA or any of those specific groups right now, but we did share it at GLN.
Thank you, Ben.
Deanne, what is your role at the ISD?
I'm on the school improvement team or continuous improvement team. So I actually facilitate along with Lisa Sorrow and Grace Falchansky, who's our Title I person, a professional learning series for our districts. Very similar to yours, organized a little bit different, but same idea, slowly moving through with teams from the district coming in, facilitated and so forth. So, so we're trying to get in front of the districts, but getting in front of our consultants who do content work and that whole organizational piece at our ISD level, that part's not actually moving. Okay.
Yeah, I have have you or Grace or the team, have you approached the leadership to say, are we going to engage in this? How are we going to engage in it? Has anybody even like broached the subject with them to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, all right, I just, my colleague and I we're here, and we'll just keep listening and waiting and hoping. Kind of like the bridesmaid on the side, just turn. So,
When and I had full support at MAISD and people were interested in this. So take that for what it's worth. But
Yeah.
the way that I did approach it with the leadership at MAISD was to say, this is the process that we're leading all of our districts through. And, we would like to run that same process internally. We still need to complete our own learning on this. And there's no better way to learn something than to do it for real with your own programs. So I see you nodding. It looks like those are the sorts of conversations you've been having. So yeah. Any other thoughts?
I tried the direct, I tried the backward, side, whatever. So
Yep.
it's about waiting. So
Lindsay, I saw you unmute. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so we have been having this conversation, and so I just want to piggyback on what you're both saying. My superintendent and our team of cross-departmental directors are on board with using MICIP as our ISD continuous improvement process. So we have one center, and that director will be integrated into the process piece. But this isn't driven by aggregation of data across centers or programs. This is driven by aggregation of data across districts. And we're looking at how we're serving our districts and if what we're doing is working. And my superintendent is mostly interested in kind of understanding how we know we're meeting the needs of our district and these kind of big questions, right? And we have 19 districts. And so we're just in the very infant stages. We had our first meeting on Monday of like my superintendent and all the directors, our business director, our tech director, our person from accounting, person from HR, people from our special ed director and assistant special ed director, like that. So that, yes, Lynn, that systems level data piece is going to be really big for us. So I guess I'm wondering two things. Is anyone else doing that? Like, does anyone in this group either themselves or know of someone who, whether we had centers or not, or, we're using the MICIP process piece as our continuous improvement process as an agency. And then secondly, I guess if there is anybody, I would love to talk to you because we're trying to figure it out as we go. And I have some pieces in place. But is anybody doing that?
So Lindsay, this is Chris. So our ISD is starting off with the student programs, and that was primarily driven by our schools operating under we have to have it done by the end of the school year. But our plan, kind of our thought of action is we're going to start there, and then we're going to go to the other side with the service agency part of the house too. So we're kind of envisioning this as two separate pieces and trying to chunk and bite off what we can do in parts. So we're starting with the student side and then going over to the other side. So I would imagine maybe next year, that'll be the conversation.
Okay, great. That'd be great. I'll keep it in mind, Chris. I know we've talked a little bit about the overlap with the strategic planning pieces and some of the district pieces going on that way too. So we can just keep talking. But great, thank you.
Okay, yep.
Shelley, I saw that you just put a book into the chat. Do you mind unmuting and just kind of talking through that a little bit?
Not a problem. So we started with really bringing our TCs and our psychs and social workers, and we even brought our GSC folks and instructional consultants in, and we did a lot of learning around the MICIP mindset for the purpose of they do support a lot of the whole child efforts within our districts, but they also serve as participants on some of the school improvement planning and in their MTSS teams. And so we really wanted them to have a common knowledge, vocabulary, and understanding so they could have the same types of conversations within their buildings. So by doing that with them first, they haven't been caught off guard necessarily around all of this as they're having conversation in their buildings. They've been able to be better participants within that process. And I do think that as we move forward with the ISD the planning within the MICIP platform that's going to help us, because they've seen that WIS model, that understanding of the mindset. We've had a little bit of conversation about what is the data that we could possibly use for our programs and services too. So I think we're in the right direction, but if you're having a hard time with buy-in, that might be one way to go if you have staff that also support those conversations at the district level.
Thanks, Charlie.
Lindsay, was the book called Systems Level Data?
I think that Lynn and I just were going back and forth about systems level data in general a little bit and kind of talking about what that lens is. And you know that that lens translates programs, districts, it doesn't matter what you're doing for continuous improvement. That's part of MICIP, that's part of continuous improvement. So, you know, if anybody wants to talk about supporting resources, that'd be awesome, but we didn't have anything specific.
Okay, so she didn't reference a book. No, okay. I thought
Not that
she
I
did,
know of.
sorry.
Although
Okay.
I'm sure that Lynn would have books she could contribute. To put you on the spotlight.
I think just one thing that I might add, we did some stuff really similar to what Shelley was talking about with our special education and instructional services department, where they've actually been involved for the last 2 years in trying to do this mindset shift from school improvement to continuous improvement. And we've run a couple of county-wide initiatives where we used to run comprehensive needs assessment days, where now that it's kind of built into the system, we won't have to do that anymore. But you know, we would co-run that with our special education department, so that it was an instructional services and a special education initiative. And so in trying to change the mindset for the constituents in preparation for MICIP, we're also working internally to adjust our own mindsets around that and try to help everybody to understand what continuous improvement is and the big initiatives that they're being asked to participate in. You know, how does that connect with what the district's needs are, and how are they connecting to the sorts of strategies and activities that they want to put in place with MICIP. And through that work, I find that I end up being very, very busy because my special education and instructional services consultants want me involved in a lot of the large decision-making that's being made in districts because they want to see that work represented in their continuous improvement plan. And so, you know, where before, you know, they might just go out and the district might say, oh, you know, we need a new curriculum. So what are the curricular resources? Now they're going out and they're saying, you know, oh, so what were the needs that showed that we need a new curriculum, and, you know, and those sorts of things. Oh, are you planning to build that into your continuous improvement plan? How are you planning to monitor the implementation of the curriculum? And so we're continuing to try to build those systems. But I do find I'm really glad that we made those moves and we're asking those sorts of questions, but I do find that I'm really busy because they're coming to me with a lot of those needs assessment questions, and where does that fit in MICIP? And hey, I got this data from them. How can we get this represented into MICIP? And so we're kind of working through a lot of those sort of things. So that's kind of where we are with that work right now, Lindsay. I would love to have it better documented and laid out, and you are like masterful at getting processes visualized. And so like at some point in the future, I'd love to make that visual, that process visual, but right now it's much more, it's a little amorphic, if that's the right word to use.
That's a good vocabulary word. Yeah, we're documenting as we go and kind of moving things around, but we do have a bit of a process, kind of a linked process doc going, as well as you can imagine, like a flow map. So yeah, we can all share and get feedback and stuff. It's good.
So we're coming to the end of our time. I want to make sure that we end on time, but just really wanted to provide this time for ISDs to get together to think about how they're doing things internally. I'm like the way that the conversation kind of morphed to then how are we building our own capacity to be able to support this. I think that those are great conversations, and I'm hopeful that there's other ways that we can continue to connect outside of this. I know that I've been reaching out and connecting with other ISDs more than I ever have before, and having these sorts of conversations. So I guess the overall takeaway is don't be an island. Make sure that you're leaning on other people as we're going through this, and we're all continuing to learn together. So with that ends our official time together. Terry, Ben, anything that you might want to add here at the end?
No, it was a pleasure to listen today, to hear the conversation. I learned so much. So thank you.
And I guess I would just add, continue to let us know how we can support the process as well. I know the suggestion was made for data templates. If there are other things that as you work through this process, you think we can do to support the work, let us know.
All right, thank you, everybody. And I will stick around for a few minutes. And if there's anybody else that needs to stick around or had any questions or would like to chat a little bit more, I'm available for a few more minutes myself.